WNYC Studios.
Last month, the revolutionary gene splicing technology with a startup-sounding name was back in the news. CRISPR was at the center of a contentious patent battle between a Harvard-affiliated research center and the University of California. In the end, the patent in question was awarded to the Massachusetts-based Broad Institute. That is our peg, or our excuse, for running two really good interviews that we want to remind you of. Research facilities and universities often compete for new patents and funding, and they keep their discoveries secret until publication so they're not scooped. Biologist Kevin Esvelt, leader of MIT's Media Lab's Sculpting Evolution Group, says this culture of secrecy is not only inefficient, it's dangerous. Writing in Nature last summer, Esvelt urged the scientific community to open all experiments to public scrutiny, beginning with the revolutionary and potentially world-changing gene editing research that he helped advance. When I spoke to Esvelt last summer, he described how CRISPR works.
So CRISPR is best thought of as a molecular scalpel that can be programmed to very precisely cut and therefore to edit any DNA sequence. And it works because when you cut a DNA sequence, the cell needs to fix it, because the next time it replicates, it needs to have made another copy.
So how can you use it? Why is it good for mankind?
Well, what it means is that we can cut a gene that we want to edit and introduce an edited version of that same gene. The cell will use our version to repair the damage. In other words, it makes CRISPR a bit like a pencil. It lets us erase the original sequence and write in a new one.
And thereby cure certain diseases?
So lots of bloodborne or immune diseases where the immune system isn't functioning right or it's under assault by something like HIV could potentially be fixed by editing a fraction of the cells to make them immune to the disease. And then those cells could replicate and make up for the ones that are not immune.
We usually think of an organism's genome as being half mom and half dad. And this principle limits CRISPR because if you were to, say, alter the genes of one mosquito in order to prevent the spread of malaria, and then you took that mosquito and released it into the wild, those changes wouldn't show up in all of its offspring. Maybe half of them would inherit them. And maybe that genetic change would be naturally selected out of the population over time, right?
That's exactly right. Whenever we edit an organism, we have to keep in mind that we're tinkering with something that has evolved to optimize reproduction in its ancestral environment. That is, the environment that that species evolved in. Anything we do to it is probably going to break something important for that. Because remember, we're altering it for our benefit, say, to block malaria, not the mosquito's benefit. So what that means is that whenever we alter an organism, we tend to assume that natural selection will eliminate our changes over time.
Mm-hmm. So now let's move on to your big innovation, CRISPR-based gene drive systems. You realized that with CRISPR, you could change the genetic destiny of an entire species.
That's right. We could cause a CRISPR edit to spread through a wild population if we simply encoded the CRISPR pencil next to the edit. So in other words, you're teaching the organism how to edit genomes on its own.
So theoretically, we could use a gene drive system to, say, eradicate malaria by introducing just one genetically altered mosquito into the population?
Yes, it takes a single organism to potentially spread that change to the entire population.
Now, the reason why we're talking about this On the Media is because we care about transparency. And it really bothered you when the U.S. National Academy of Sciences released a long-awaited set of guidelines for conducting gene drive research and left out the one that you've strenuously advocated for, which is transparency. Why is it so crucial in this case?
We as a society now have the ability to alter ecosystems. We can do it together, slowly, carefully, humbly, with collective scrutiny to keep us from making mistakes. Or we can do it behind closed doors, and scientists can ask people to trust them despite the fact that they're choosing to do their work behind closed doors. We will not only be safest, but we will be able to do the most good if we do everything in the open. What's more, I don't think that there's a moral alternative. I want people who ideologically object to the very notion of altering nature in any way. I would love for those people to take a close look at exactly what my group is working on and proposing to do, and try to find anything they can think of that might go wrong. And if they succeed, if they find something that we can't invent a way around, we can't make it safe, then the project has to halt. And that's as it should be. Right now, scientists do not tell anyone what they are currently doing and planning to do in the laboratory. I think the system would be better if all research was done in the open. Gene Drive is the place where we must start. Everyone should have an opportunity to share their concerns and criticism when it comes to technologies that will impact all of us. And we would be foolish to dismiss concerns simply because someone doesn't have a degree.
You recently met with a couple dozen Nantucket, Massachusetts residents to seek permission for a CRISPR-based experiment you wanted to conduct there, which would aim to diminish the transmission of Lyme disease. You're not worried that by sharing the design of your study with the public, you've also invited scientists in the field to scoop you?
By being so open about it and receiving media coverage about it, it will now look bad if anyone else does. So to some extent, we are free to take the first step and be rewarded for it. What's hard is for the next person coming behind us.
Yeah, it seems to me that this is a little pie in the sky. How do you change the tide of money flow?
Well, if funders require that proposals requesting money to perform experiments be made public, that would get us most of the way there. Most science is funded by the government, taxpayers. And given that, why is it done behind closed doors, which does not benefit taxpayers?
So because this kind of research changes everyone's environment, you want the whole public in on it. And you know what happens when you do that. I mean, genetically modified anything causes an instinctive clutch reaction in a lot of people. And how do you get past that?
Much of that reaction is precisely because research in genetically modified organisms did not offer clear and obvious benefits to most people. It was not done in the open. Safeguards were not clearly discussed in advance. And, of course, it was done largely by for-profit companies that people had other reasons to be skeptical of. In our discussions with the citizens of Nantucket and the Board of Health there, we did see a very different response to a project that would be nonprofit, done in the open, with the communities making all of the key decisions, where the research would be tested, what kind of resistance to Lyme and other tick-borne diseases would be engineered into the mice. We observed a very, very different response from what you typically see when you bring up genetically modified foods.
There seems to be a delicate balance here between the need to educate the public, include it into the discussions about gene drive systems, earn its trust, and the fear that the more people know about the technology and tinker with it, the greater the risk. So how do you mitigate the risk on both sides?
It's a great question. So what am I afraid of? Well, I'm not particularly worried about ecological risks. That is, in fact, I was surprised at how most of my ecologist colleagues are not particularly fazed. Even though this technology can be used to suppress populations or possibly even eradicate them entirely.
Like getting rid of mosquitoes completely.
Well, there are 3,500 species of mosquitoes in the world, and 6 of them are responsible for the vast majority of human disease. 2 are invasive in most of the world, and the other 4 are responsible for a child dying roughly every 4 minutes.
From malaria.
Yes. But there's only a few diseases in the world where you have that kind of moral urgency. The only thing I will say is that I don't get a vote because I'm not affected one way or another. It's the people who do live there that are going to have to decide. Because make no mistake, our civilization is not sustainable. We must continually invent solutions to make the world a better place. We need popular support for that. Why should people trust scientists who insist on doing their work behind closed doors?
Kevin, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Kevin Esvelt leads the MIT Media Lab's Sculpting Evolution Group. So secrecy has left scientists with a serious image problem, especially those who tinker with genes, because it seems like a short hop from mosquitoes to mice to people. Cloning, for instance, is a rich source of anxiety, especially when Dolly the Lamb was cloned by Sir Ian Wilmot on July 5th, 1996. Got any plans for the 20th anniversary? Naturally, science fiction has dug deep into clones, from Blade Runner to Boys from Brazil to The Island to the underrated Moon, go see it, and of course, BBC America's Orphan Black. The show's characters include Sarah, a British grifter, Allison, a soccer mom, Cosima, the science geek, and Helena, a stunningly unpredictable assassin. And lots of others, all clones, all far more nuanced than I could describe, all played by Maslany.
We're clones. We're someone's experiment and they're killing us off.
Their self-styled clone club pursues answers about their mysterious creator, desperate to secure their autonomy and save their lives. In his new book, What We Talk About When We Talk About Clone Club, bioethicist Gregory Pence uses the universe of Orphan Black to probe the thorny ethics of cloning. Gregory, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Now, as a bioethicist, you are pro-human cloning, which I take it is not a mainstream view among bioethicists?
No, I'm a lone wolf, kind of an outsider when it comes to cloning.
We're so used to imagining clones as commodities, soldiers or slaves or the source of spare body parts, and there are plenty of filmic depictions of all of that.
Commerce is our goal here at Tyrell. More human than human is our motto. Rachel is an experiment, nothing more.
Some hag trophy wife needs new skin for a facelift, or one of them gets sick and they need a new heart. They take it from you.
We modified their genetic structure to make them less independent than the original host.
I prefer to think of being created by cloning as a delayed twin. And we've had delayed twins. We've had two embryos who have split, and one was implanted 8 years after the other. And anything that's true about a delayed twin would be true of cloning. So if we created two versions of Taylor Swift from her embryo, we couldn't just kill them and use them, as a commodity.
And this is because of the principle of non-discrimination by origins, a phrase that you coined, right?
Yes. It basically says that the way you were originated, whether your parents were married or whether your sperm and egg met in a test tube, really doesn't matter to your human status. And therefore, you can't be killed for your parts. People had exactly the same fears, including some Nobel Prize winners, about the first test tube baby, Louise Brown. And as soon as the baby was walking down the street with her mother in a pram, people said, "Oh, it's just a baby. Oh, how lovely," because it was in England. And all that stuff about the scares just kind of went away.
So you think the same thing must and will apply to clones because that's just the way humans are? We think babies are cute?
If a child was created by cloning to someone who is, say, aspermatic or just all the other ways had failed, that child would be very, very highly wanted. And this is where the rub comes ethically, not only just as a baby, but for those specific characteristics.
That's a big rub, yeah.
Yeah, it is a big rub. It's called the argument for an open future, the idea that every child should have an open future. And if you clone LeBron James, then everybody's going to expect him to be a basketball player, not a rabbi. But people still have free will. Expectations aren't necessarily destiny. And the Pacific Rim, they kind of see our almost puritanical fear of cloning as a chance to get ahead of us.
We know that the evil people in Orphan Black are the people who devised the experiment that brought these clones into being. One of them is someone named Aldous Leakey, which is a kind of compression of Aldous Huxley,
yes,
who wrote Brave New World, and Leakey, the famous anthropologist.
I'll be able to offer you the ability to see into a spectrum never before seen by the naked eye. Infrared, X-rays, ultraviolet. You interested?
Maybe I'll just start with basic LASIK.
And so you should. That's making an evolutionary choice. Neolution gives us the opportunity at a self-directed evolution. I believe that's not only a choice, but a human right.
Are you agreeing with him? Dr. Pence?
No. There's a tension in the show between getting the facts right and being dramatic. And unfortunately, the evil scientist in the show provides the drama.
But I mean, do you believe the basic impulse to improve ourselves through science?
Yes. I just walked here from across the campus and went by Children's Hospital, which is a major hospital for the Southeast. Probably about half of the kids in there suffer from some genetic condition, cystic fibrosis, Tay-Sachs. If you could eliminate those problems, it would alleviate a huge amount of human suffering. There's a gradient between eliminating terrible genetic defects to improving people. But once you open the door to choice, I think it's going to be very hard to say, well, you can choose this, but you can't choose that.
But you're not afraid of opening that door.
Not given the kind of conditions I see in the kids in Children's Hospital. We have a man here at UAB who has a cure for sickle cell in mice, but the NIH and other people won't let him try it on humans because they're so afraid that something might go wrong.
On the other hand, you can't be experimenting on human subjects who might suffer even worse as a result, right?
Well, I think you can, if they voluntarily consent and they're educated and they've experienced sickle cell in their own families and know what it can do in their carriers. Otherwise, we basically have to say, we're done. No more medical progress.
Okay, let me make a distinction here between messing around with genes to make us more disease-resistant or healthier and cloning. IVF babies are one thing. Cloning yourself is another. It's yuckily narcissistic, it seems. Everyone remembers the 1978 film The Boys from Brazil, which essentially brings back legions of Hitler.
He had denied himself children because he knew that no son could flourish in the shadow of so godlike a father. But then he heard what was theoretically possible, that I could create one day, not his son, not even a carbon copy, but another original.
Jawohl!
I don't think you necessarily have to say that any child originated by cloning would be someone's narcissistic fantasy. You know how people go out to the sperm bank in Los Angeles and the women kind of look through the different guys? I think that's a more realistic and plausible scenario.
It's curious. We often talk about the media on this show as being a reflection of ourselves, kind of a mirror.
Yeah.
You see something similar at work in the way cloning critics think about cloning.
Yes, I think cloning is a kind of Rorschach test for our fears about parental choice and scientists gone mad.
The deepest needs we want fulfilled with another human being, right?
Absolutely. The two dominant pictures of cloning in the media are someone who fits a certain stereotype of female beauty, and another stereotype is of the warrior, men who are going to just basically follow orders and be super soldiers. One of the problems for the media in using these stereotypes, it tends to make you ignore the more substantive issues ethically about money. In Orphan Black, some of the more interesting points are about people patenting DNA, using stem cells as medicine for people, and how powerful the desire for profits. That, in some ways, is the more interesting story.
And Cosima, she's the scientifically minded clone, talks about precisely that.
A patent? We're property. Our bodies, our biology, everything we are, everything we become belongs to them.
As you point out in your book, whether a part of a living organism can be patented is the source of an extremely thorny legal debate. So why don't you kick that off with a brief description of the 1980 Supreme Court case Diamond versus Chakrabarti?
So the question was whether a novel organism that was created by Chakrabarti, which basically ate oil and converted it to something nice, could be patented. And the court said, yes, this is a novel invention. The person who created this deserves to have some revenues from it. But if you take that further, then you start to wonder how much of the human DNA can be patented.
And that takes you to 2013. The Supreme Court ruled that they couldn't patent the human gene related to breast cancer because it was simply a discovery of something that already existed in nature.
And the court saw rather quickly something that might create a whole human and be patented. People really don't quite know what to do about it. Ultimately, I'm not sure how much we can control. We certainly ought to see it coming.
Explain to me why you decided to write this book about this show.
Orphan Black is one of the very few shows I've ever seen who treats beings created by cloning in a dignified, natural way. They're not commodities. They're not zombies. It tries to get the science right, at least in the first 3 seasons.
They're very clear on their own individual identities.
We're all messed up. Except you, Sarah. I'm the biggest mess there is, Alice. No, because you say F it. I tried to say F it today, and I blew up my whole life. My name is Rachel Duncan, and we are going to come to terms.
It's a double blind. The monitor's unaware of the purpose of the experiment. That way they can't skew the results.
First I eat, then we fight.
The show gets this absolutely right, that small differences in surrogate mothers or what the mother ate, parental upbringing is going to be a major factor in how people turn out, and the particular culture they were raised in, whether they're raised by Ukrainian nuns or on Long Island as a soccer mom.
Now, I thought that was one of the most interesting parts of your book. Clones are not, strictly speaking, identical. Identical twins, despite a lot of really flashy twin studies, are not even so identical. And you explain why, that there are variations on the molecular level and variations in how parental genes are expressed. You don't necessarily get a 50% expression from your father's gene in a particular trait and 50% from your mother. They could vary even if you have identical genes.
Yes, and whatever package of genes we have a different response to different environments. So if people are starving, one kind of expression comes out in our genes. If we're full of food, kind of don't have to work very hard, our genes might be expressed another way. That's basically the backbone of epigenetics. Our genes can turn this way rather than that based on what's going on not only in utero, but in childhood and the whole rest of our life. We're just starting to understand that, though, and that is a huge, huge project.
And now let's get to the stickiest wicket of Orphan Black, the question of sexual and gender orientation and identity. It isn't just about a science geek clone and a soccer mom clone. It's about a gay clone and a trans clone. If our sexual identity and orientation is pretty much decided by our genes, then are they walking into a particularly murky landscape here in Orphan Black?
Well, I must say, Brooke, this was one of the most delicate issues to research and write about in the book. One of the ways we know about twins is there's a reunion every year in Twinsburg, Ohio, and some identical twins, one person is heterosexual and one's gay. So that's pretty strong evidence that pretty much the same genes, because of epigenetics or childhood influences, can be expressed in different ways. So the show is just basically validating what people already know.
We started this discussion by noting that you're basically in favor of cloning. In 2000, you were the lone bioethicist to testify before Congress against bills that would have criminalized human cloning, right?
Yes, they wanted to make it a federal crime to create both reproductive cloning and embryonic cloning.
Mm-hmm.
If I wanted to create some of my own cells and make it into my medicine, or maybe Michael J. Fox wants to do this and drip it into his brain to help Parkinson's, I don't see that's a big deal. I really don't. Reproductive cloning, then you're creating a baby, which is ethically different territory than creating stuff.
Would you testify before Congress in favor of reproductive cloning?
Sure.
You would?
Using IVF in 1977 was an unethical experiment, but it became ethical to try it. So we might want to still have the tool around. If we made it a federal crime, or if we say never, I think that's a mistake. We just don't know what the future holds. Let's just leave it out there and see what happens with gorillas and chimpanzees. Maybe one day there will be a reason why we would want to try it.
And you have enough faith that human beings won't
mess it up?
Yeah.
Basically, I trust parents that they're going to want the best for their children.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gregory Pence is author of What We Talk About When We Talk About Clone Club. Do you have a favorite clone?
Helena.
Me too!
Everybody loves Helena. She's kind of like an intercontinental ballistic weapon that Sarah can unleash anytime she wants. You want me to kill them?
You want me to kill them.
What have they done to you? Are you okay?
I'm most wonderful.
Thanks for listening to this On the Media Podcast Extra. I'm Brooke Gladstone.